Steve, you were raised in Palos Verdes Estates in California. Were you born there?
No, I was born in Palo Alto.
Palo Alto. Okay. What are your earliest memories of growing up there?
Well, actually, you see, my father had gone to Palo Alto because he had gotten his PhD from Caltech under Linus Pauling, who was his advisor. And at the time, in the chemistry physics market, it's either feast or famine. And at the time, it was famine, so there were no jobs. So he accepted a job at the College of the Nazarene, which was around Palo Alto somewhere. And he didn't really like that because they didn't believe in evolution, and there were kinds of religious restrictions on what he could talk about. So then from there we went to Hawaii, where I was there until I was, I think, 4. And then after that he went on the job market again. This was, I think, a visiting job at Hawaii. And then from there, he got a visiting job at Princeton, and he was filling the place of some famous professor who had gone to, I think, France, some big-time physicist, and he was hoping that the big-time physicist would be gone for 2 years, so he would get 2 years in at Princeton, but he came back after 1 year. During that year, actually, I was wandering around the house and walked into the home of Albert Einstein, and I had a little conversation with Einstein before my mother and father figured out where I was. So anyway, after that, he got a job in college at University of Maryland, College Park. He got tenure there, and so I remember growing up in College Park, which is, a college town, of course, and we were on 4614 Harvard Road. And so we were there until my parents had their 4th child, which was Sarah. And at that point, he was finding it sort of difficult to support a family of 4 kids. And so he got a job offer from Hughes Aircraft Company, which offered him something like 5 times his salary, and also promised that he could continue to do research. So that sounded pretty good. So we went to California, and actually we stayed at a hotel in Santa Monica for, I think, a month while they were house hunting. And we eventually got a house in Palos Verdes, and so then at that point I went to a private school. Well, I went to the public school for 1 year, I think. And the public schools in California at that time were pretty much of a disaster. So my father decided to send me to a private school called Chadwick. And so that pretty much rounds out my childhood.
What do you have any sense of what actual duties your father performed for Hughes Aircraft?
Yeah, he was doing pure research, but also he was doing missile research.
He was a chemist, right?
Yeah, he was a physical chemist.
Physical chemist.
And he was helping with the missiles that were supposed to attack if missiles came in from Russia. And he was working on missile cones. There's something called bakelite, which was sort of state of the art at the time. It was a material that was very that could handle a lot of heat and so on. So that's what he was doing.
I see. Okay. Did you ever go surfing?
Oh yeah.
In California?
I mean, as often as I could. Maybe at least 3 or 4 times a week, and that was wonderful. I grew up in the ocean, and we could just walk down basically we could drive down, a very short drive, and we spent a lot of time surfing and swimming and all those things.
Did Tony and Sarah and Sophie were they beach bunnies too, or?
Sarah was too young, and Sophie was too, and Tony was pretty young too. So I mean, they would come, and they would be on the beach when we went there as a family. Yeah.
Yeah.
But.
And then everything changed when your father passed away. At age
Yeah, he
40.
got brain cancer, and he died in 1959 at the age of 46. So then my mother had to sort of make had to support figure out a way to support the family. So then we all left. Actually, I spent one more summer at Chadwick. The Chadwicks let me live in their house, which was very nice. They had a gorgeous house. And but then my mother went to Michigan because your father, Steve, was in effect my godfather, I guess you could say, because he and my father were very close. And so she sort of felt she could go to Ann Arbor and have sort of some support, which she did. And at that point, actually, I went my senior year to Exeter, which is where my father went for 4 years, and where your father went for 1 year, actually, also. So then anyway, she was in Ann Arbor, I was at Exeter, and then from there on, I ended up going to Oberlin College after a little stint, and finished up there, and then I went back to law school in Ann Arbor, and graduated in '69.
And then Chicago for...
Yeah, and then I practiced law for a while, and then I got the idea. I was, of course, married to Laura, and we had Nathaniel just at the point where I was considering a career change. So that, for me, was a pretty gutsy move, and I wouldn't have done it. I decided to get a PhD in economics even though I was doing quite well in law. So that was a big career transition for me, and the most difficult part, and of course I could not have done it without Laura's support and encouragement. She didn't even hesitate. She said, "Yeah, let's do this. Yeah, I mean, you've always been interested in this kind of thing, so let's do it." And so anyway, we went to Chicago, and I got my PhD, and then became an economist.
And then from there you moved...
I had a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon for 2 years, and then I got a job at Wayne State. I've been there since 1967.
Right. And about to become the chair of your department.
Yeah, I turned down a couple of previous offers, and this time there was sort of the alternatives to me I thought would be worse than my becoming chair, so I just decided to agree to become chair. So, I mean...
Have you ever thought of, I don't know what the mobility of a professor is these days, but have you ever thought of leaving Detroit at any time during your tenure there that maybe you would have liked to live somewhere else or taught somewhere else?
Yeah, certainly that's crossed my mind. The thing is, we got sort of involved. Laura, who's a registered nurse, started working for her tribe, the Huron Potawatomi, and she was on the tribal council for quite a while. And then she became tribal chair, and I sort of got involved with that, and also her family, her mother and sister and her sister's children, 3 children, we got sort of involved with them, and so it became sort of a question of, were we going to break all those ties, and I got involved also with the work that Laura was doing as tribal chair, helping her write things for the newsletter. So I never really seriously made an attempt to go somewhere else. So, which Laura thought I should actually consider, but I never actually did. And the kids were in school too. You get to a point where you're really uprooting yourself to do something like that.
Now, you've written a book about J.E. Spurr, and you've been to Alaska.
And let me say that with regard to that book, that I got tremendous assistance from you and Ted, who did a much better job as editors than the supposed editor of the journal of the press that I published it with. And your suggestion, I mean, you read every word, and so did Ted, and that was a great thing. You guys found all kinds of mistakes that the other ones didn't. So,
well, it's a great thing that you did the book. And what I know we've all been felt this sort of attachment or allegiance to J.E. Spurr. None of us really knew him very well. I was 2 when he died. You were 5, I guess.
right.
but he's sort of the patriarch of this family, and a fascinating character in a lot of ways. And he wrote his own autobiography. What prompted you to decide, okay, I'm going to fill in some gaps here and devote a lot of time to it?
Well, I guess it was partly an ego trip, partly I was interested in the family history, and I wanted to find. It started out as a family history, because there were these gods of my youth. There was Jack and Steve and Bill and my father and Ted, and J.E. Spurr, sort of above everybody, and Grandma Spurr, of course, is this really strong matriarchal figure who basically raised everybody, except by the time your father was actually raised as much by J.E. Spurr. I was just interested, and I wanted to find out what were these people really like. I mean, were they flaws? Were they perfect? And along the way, I found out that they were very good in most respects, but they did have some flaws, and there were some interesting little foibles that I could talk about, and some great anecdotes. I mean, I couldn't compete with the autobiography of J.E. Spurr, so basically what I did is I stole a lot of things from it, sort of repackaged it to maybe make it flow a little better, I thought. And, I looked at letters and so on, and I got materials from relatives that were very helpful. I was just curious about it. Just wanted to know more about those people.
You're 68. You think there's still time to climb Mount Spurr?
Well, that's the $64 question, $68 question. And Nat just ran into a guy, actually, who was a high school classmate who is interested in climbing Mount Spurr and has climbed in the Alaska Range. And also Joy's daughter-in-law's father is a very accomplished climber who's been in the Himalayas, and I think has climbed K2. I guess he climbed Kanchenjunga, which is the third or fourth tallest mountain in the world in the Himalayas. He'd like to do it. So, and I realize that the clock is ticking and all of that. So I think it's still a possibility. Yeah, nobody else thinks so, but I think so. Yeah.
Sarah, you had a question.
I just have two questions. If you could think of 5 words to describe your father, what would they be?
5 words? Well, he was very dignified, very reserved. He was sort of introverted, very, very bright. Uncle Steve said he was the brightest person he'd ever encountered, but kind of formal.
Strict?
Yes, somewhat strict, but not in a Marine Sergeant type way, but he just had very high expectations. Very high expectations. So I wouldn't dare get a B in a course. I mean, that would be, I would feel real bad because I would know that he would think it was terrible. And also, and with regard to Uncle Steve, he was one of these people who, whenever I talked to him, it was like talking to a sort of a higher level of human being. And I always, after talking to him, I always felt, God, I should have done better at this. I should have worked harder. I shouldn't have wasted my time doing this sort of thing. So it was great to have him as a sort of a role model after my father died. So.
And your father died when you were 15?
14.
14 years old?
Yes.
And then you went to Exeter?
As a senior, yeah.
Only a couple of months after his death. He died in June of 59.
Yeah.
And in September you had left your family, you'd left.
Well, then I went to Exeter and I had my senior year there. Yeah.
Right. But you were separated, you were not at Chadwick, you were separated from your mother and your siblings.
Well, she had already gone to Michigan, and
right.
So yeah.
And then the last question is, and this might be related to the Bob Spurr question, but what do you think it means to be a Spurr? What does that?
Well, I think it's terrific to have that kind of those relatives, those uncles and ultra high achievers and high expectations, and not only that, but I mean, we all had trust funds to see us through college and law school, and that's obviously a great thing too. So,
Great role models.
yeah, role models, and I think I sort of took it for granted, but when they're gone, you realize what you've lost.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
My dad made a comment on a number of occasions about the relationship between your mother and father. And you know, as we all know, your mother was an actress.
Right. Very different person.
Very different person.
Totally outgoing.
Very emotional.
Yeah.
Very fun-loving.
Right.
Always had to have a convertible car.
Life of the party.
And Dad always made the comment. He said, I think it always puzzled my father as to why he married your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know, I think having Ibby in the house was like having television. You know, it was like entertainment. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always try to imagine that this isn't the Cleaver family, obviously. You know, but
Right.
what was that like? You know, with
Well, she was just
their relationship.
She was
yeah.
extroverted and enthusiastic, and she loved to meet people. She loved to entertain, which all of the things he wasn't. You know, he
Yeah.
just wanted to sort of read and study and do research, and so you know they complemented each other. I mean, she would introduce him to things that he wouldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, she had some shortcomings. She never cooked, or rarely, but it worked. You know, it's one of those mysteries of human relationships.
Yeah.
She had a good figure too, and she was, you know, so there were some obvious things that would attract him. So,
Anybody else have a question for Steve?
Well, I guess I just have a more general question for everybody, or anybody that wants to chime in, but I mean, with what you just touched on, how you viewed Uncle Steve and, you know, your father after, has anybody, you know, a couple years ago, my brother had just finished his master's degree, and after the commencement, we kind of all went out to lunch, and we were talking about the previous generations of Spurs, and especially with how distinguished J.E. Spurr, you know, and his 5 sons were, you know, in different fields. Has anybody else in the family had, you know, problems just feeling like, you know, you might have come up short, or you should have done better, or just dealing with the pressures of the success that the previous generations have had? Because I remember at this, you know, we were all talking about that, and people, you know, Dillis Barney was at the lunch, and you know, my dad's wife Joy, and we were talking about it, and people were saying, oh, well, yeah, the Spurs, you know, the Spurr family used to be an incredibly distinguished, you know, family, and then after a minute or so, somebody said, you know, and they still are, you know, and like we all laughed. But
I completely did. I mean, that's why, as I explained, I decided to get you know, I copped out. You know, decided to, you know, I always thought I had to have a PhD. Everybody was working on a PhD. My dad had one, you know, Bob had one, Steve had one, Tony was working on one.
J.E. Spurr didn't though, right?
No, he didn't, but that was back before.
Didn't need it.
You didn't, you know, he even awarded them. He was so ancient, I
Yeah.
guess. But that's how I copped out and got a master's degree in creative writing, because you can't get a PhD in creative writing. And that was my, that was like, that was easy.
I was crestfallen that I never made tenure. I wanted to be a professor, modern dance professor. And in 1980, when I got my master's from UCLA, I'd gone to all the right schools. I'd gone to Putney School and Sarah Lawrence, and I knew what I wanted to do. And I applied all over the country for like 5 years. And I got little visiting instructor positions at different Southern California community colleges, but never made tenure track. And I think that was really hard on me.
Well, that's something, you realize that's something like 85% of all people who teach now are in that situation.
Yeah.
You know, they're going from,
But also,
they're putting together 2 or 3 part-time jobs, and they never are on the tenure track.
yes, and so the whole thing of being an adjunct professor was kind of like the thing, and it was just too much for me to go to the University of Arizona. Different places wanted me to teach as a visiting professor, but I think I was not emotionally mature enough at the age of 22, because most of my students were 19 or 20. I was 23 when I got my degree, or 26. I just wasn't grown up enough, but I sort of felt like I cashed in too, like less than for many years by going into physical therapy, because it just sort of seemed like a vocation. But it's pretty much saved my life, and I realize they can't always have everything, but I still teach dance and Pilates. But in 1980, all of the because of the Reagan years, the National Endowment for the Arts sort of went tanked, and so a lot of modern dance companies were defunct, and it was just a hard time. But yeah, in the academic world, I just want to say one more thing. Pretty much the chemistry and physics department had lots of men and lots of money, and the math departments, but then when you got to theater, that was like the most broke department, because maybe they had 1 or 2 full professor positions, but the people that were really in the basement were the modern dance department, because it wasn't even as good as the theater department. Often the modern dance wasn't even like a professor, it was like a half position, and it was in the physical education department. And I probably applied to 200 colleges from age 26 to 30. And so it was just a profession that it's hard to...
Disrespect it.
Well, you just don't make a lot of money as a professor of modern dance. And I had one boyfriend who said, I don't know if you're going to make a lot of money teaching snails how to jump through hoops. I was like, okay, thanks.
The other thing now too, I'm not a Spur, but I think, what you are looking at is that you had a 5-brother lineup, of all these brothers that, when you get siblings, there gets to be some sort of momentum of sometimes if one sibling does it, then the other one automatically goes to X, or so it's different when the generations split out a little bit and there aren't 5 brothers to compete with. So it's
Well, I think
different.
the key thing too is just to exploit your own potential and your own interests, and not to compare yourself. I mean, and there are all kinds of. I mean, I've been in 2 professions, economics and a lawyer, and they all have their own pecking order and hierarchy, and where I am in Grosse Pointe, the only thing that really counts for a lot of people is how much money do you make. That's it, So I think you got to just avoid comparing yourself to others, and do what you are good at and what you enjoy doing, and just and that. Then you'll be a success.
Yeah.
That would be my definition of success.
You only learn that over time.
Yeah,
as
that
you
True.
mature,
comes with
and when
maturity.
you're younger, it's
Yeah.
pretty hard to.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a kid, you're not as good a basketball player as someone else because he's taller. So you just have to kind of sort that out and figure out that you have to do what you're good at and what you like doing, and not get into this comparative, because there's always going to be somebody who's richer or publishes more, or can shoot a basket better, or shoot a ball through a basket. And so you got to get away from that way of thinking about your life, I think.
One thing different with our generations too is the way we were raised. Penny commented once that Grandma Spurr was a Victorian parent, and she raised her sons as a Victorian. They communicated with her. She pretty much told them what they should be doing. I found letters from my father
Yes.
that said that he was reporting back and saying, well, we're right on plan, we're right on schedule, I've done this, and I've done that, and I've done that. But she required it, I think. She required that her sons
Yeah.
stay with the program that she and Grandpa had decided on.
Yeah. Oh,
And I
yeah.
thought that was very interesting, that that was the Victorian.
And before Grandpa Spurr died, I would sit with him and just ask as many questions as I could, because I thought, I'll never know. The things that aren't in these books, I'll never know unless I ask him. And so I loved that time. And I remember pouring through the books and reading the poetry of J.E. Spurr and some from, my Grandpa Spurr. And I actually got some satisfaction from that because at the time, as a teenager, maybe it was my ego, but I was writing poetry and I was artistic and creative, and I thought, well, these guys, they wanted to be poets, but I am a poet. And I don't know, I felt like they had this vast scientific knowledge and all these credentials and accomplishments, but somehow in my heart I felt like that was in me, but I was a different expression of it, and what kind of fruition that takes I still have yet to see. But and even actually a couple weeks ago we went out to see the super moon. I don't know if anyone saw that. The moon was 30% closer, or 30% brighter and 14% closer than normal. And I took Stephen H. Spurr's binoculars out to our local field, and we all at midnight went out to look at the moon, and I could see all the craters and could talk to the kids about, the Spurr crater and these things, and I had never seen the moon so clear and bright, and it just hit me. The whole thing kind of hit me, and I thought, he's here, he's with us, and in that way it felt like it was transmitted, through the generations, and we can still tell these stories and carry on with these pieces of them that have certainly inspired me and hopefully will inspire our young ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that, sets that generation apart, and certainly the five brothers, was that they had a classical education where you learned Latin and you recited poetry, and
Yeah.
we
Well,
don't.
Uncle Steve was always rattling off poems, entire poems.
Yeah,
So,
he
It might have
did.
been easier to get into Harvard too at that time. You had the money and the family connections. I don't know. I don't know. But for me, one of the most significant things, just to finish up, when I was crestfallen about not being able to be a modern dance professor, Tony Spurr, my brother, wrote me a letter saying, just because you're not a dolphin in marine land doesn't mean you're not a dolphin. And that changed my life. I got my Pilates certification. I continued to teach small jobs here and there in different community colleges, modern dance technique and composition, and I realized that, life hits you with different things.
What a great line.
Yeah, that's great.
And you don't always maybe get to do that dream job, but maybe that dream job wouldn't have been so great. Maybe I was supposed to help people who have balance problems, and so I thought that was such a great thing to say. It just made sense to me, and I was like, yeah, I can be a dolphin anywhere. I can be my own kind of dolphin.
A free dolphin.
Excuse me, going back to what you said about the 60s, that's a really interesting point. I think there was just maybe a 4 or 5 year period there, maybe just the leading edge of the baby boom, where we all knew that it was evil to make money, and it was evil to make money off people.
well, not all of us knew that.
I just remember being sort of acquiring that kind of an ethos and knowing that it was not the right thing to be doing, and it was quite a while before I could realize that was nonsense. But I do think that some of us were casualties of that generation.
It was really important that sort of reprioritization happened. I mean, it restructured our whole dynamic, and we're going through another one right now where the black-white conversation is sort of being sort of administered, whether we like it or not, and maybe it's not even. To me, it's. Well, it's out. I mean, now we're actually having a conversation that's needed to be there for a very long time, and I think it's weird and natural at the same time. Which in the '60s were like that, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of like step evolution, how we kind of have these odd revolutions.
There really is a difference between generations.
Yeah.
And we don't always see it because we look at the way people are raising their children now and look at the way we were raised. I mean, it's a completely different dynamic.
Really
And I
different.
think because of our lineage, there is somewhat of a pressure to be like the best Spur you can be, if you will, whatever that means. But just, yeah, that we were privileged, when, you know, I was privileged to have my college paid for, a very good college and boarding school, and, you know, you want to live up to that legacy. You don't want
Yeah.
to disappoint
Yeah.
that person who left you that money, you know, his family.
Well,
money.
sometimes that can be a little bit of a handicap too. I mean, like, when I went back to my Chadwick reunion, I was talking to this guy whose father was an executive at some aerospace firm, and he sent him to Chadwick, which is a very expensive school then and now. And then when he graduated, he figured, well, I'll apply to college. And his father sort of took him aside and said, you know, from now on, it's up to you.
You're on your- yeah,
I'm not going to give you another penny.
Yeah.
So he had to scramble for scholarships. He had to keep his grade average up to stay in school, just like J.E. Spurr did.
Yeah.
You know, J.E. Spurr, he was from a Gloucester fishing family. They had no money at all.
Right, right.
So he had to, if he hadn't gotten at the top, stayed at the top of his class, he would have been booted out of Harvard. So that kind of pressure, and so this guy went to college, and he went to Brigham Young. He wasn't a Mormon, but he could get a full scholarship there, and he became a very successful orthopedic surgeon, making millions and millions. So, you know, to some extent, it's helpful if you have to kind of scramble a little bit. But I think the key is you have to find out what you want to do and then do it. And you have to, you know, like I did not want to be a professor because I was surrounded by professors. And I wanted to do something different, you know, sort of a rebellion thing. I wanted to become a businessman and make a lot of money. And then after some years of law practice, I figured, you know, I'm just not the corporate type. It just doesn't fit me at all. You know, I want to go back, get a PhD, and so that's what I did. And that's a perfect fit. So you have to kind of go through these stages where you kind of work things out for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, this is true.
This is like group therapy.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah,
Yay, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Don't say that.
yeah.
Thank you.